Good evening and welcome to Between the Lines. I'm John Matisonn. I'm particularly pleased and honored tonight to have in our studio Dennis Goldberg. He was a Rivonia trialist with Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu and the other leaders of the ANC. Spent 22 years in prison in Pretoria Central, during which time he only saw his wife twice. He came out and wrote a book called A Life for Freedom, The Mission to End Racism in South Africa. He was one of the very first members of Umkhonto weSizwe in the very early days, and that was after a life that could have been privileged. He'd been to the University of Cape Town, where he'd become qualified as a civil engineer. Dennis, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Nice to be here.
Now, you've devoted your life to the struggle of the ANC, led by this man, your friend, Mandela. When you see the humiliation of the ANC last week, getting 54% of the vote, possibly losing Johannesburg, Tshwane, Ekurhuleni, Nelson Mandela Bay, and of course Cape Town, what goes through your mind?
Well, first that we say led by Nelson Mandela, who was a leader among great leaders. And you cannot separate him from Oliver Tambo and a whole generation. And at the bottom of the list you can add me, just a little part of that generation who had a vision of what the future South Africa should be. What do I have to say about the elections? The African National Congress held the high ground for a very long time. In the last years, it has failed to hold on to that high ground through innumerable scandals of finance, of corruption, of cronyism, and I think unfair attack on lack of service delivery. Because if you think of where we come from, in 1994, civil service serving the needs of 5.5 million whites and a few million around, then having to serve the needs of presently 52 million people. Where do you get such a trained civil service? In a country where the majority people, African, less than half the kids went to school, they were illiterate, but were never given responsibility for decision making. And I know now with my ordinary household, sometimes my desk is piled up with papers because I can't decide what to do. And I'm a trained civil engineer with lots of other degrees. And this is a problem, and we've not overcome it. It's that we haven't overcome it is the problem, the deeper problem. But simply for students, for example, I mention them because the youth vote went to both to the DA and the EFF. They don't know where we came from in education, and they don't care. And this is our most educated group of young people ever. And the idea of torching a laboratory building at University of Johannesburg, 100 million rands worth of damage to infrastructure. What about other students? What about a library at Wits? What about the kinds of things that are happening which show a lack of intellectual ability to analyze? I believe we've come a tremendously long way in only 22 years, and yet the public perception is also justified. And that supporters of the ANC, the party by its policies, the party that from the African Claims document develops into the Youth League, into the Freedom Charter, South Africa belongs to all who live in it, loses the vote of minority groups. And I'm talking about coloured and Indian as well as white. In the Western Cape, where I live, the ANC is split between African and coloured. And coloured people don't feel that they belong.
True.
But South Africa belongs to all who live in it. It's not good enough for President Zuma at election time to go to Belhar and start to woo votes with door to door. Of course, the problem of the African people is the deepest problem, the vast majority, the most oppressed historically. But you can't ignore people and then expect them to vote for you. ANC is virtually wiped out in the Western Cape. But what distresses me more about the response of ANC current leadership is to claim a victory. Lost 3 metros outright, or 1 or 2 in the balance. Yes, have done very well except in the Western Cape. But the minority parties, the lesser parties, the DA and the EFF, have gained seats everywhere. This was a referendum on the ANC, and we failed. For the Deputy President to say, now we need to introspect. But veterans like me have been publicly calling for the introspection for 3 years. And they haven't done it. And the immediate response? We've done very well under the leadership of President Zuma. And how did he do it? With a retrograde campaign. Vote for us because we are black and the others are the apartheid party and the racists. This is not upholding our Freedom Charter, not upholding our constitutional duty to promote a non-racial South Africa. To remain in power. For what? More cronyism? More lack of integration? I can go on and on.
Well, I want to come in there because leading off from what you've said, one of the things I've heard on television and radio, one of the words I hear most to describe the ANC and one of the reasons for its fall, besides a lot of the analysis you get about corruption and so on, is arrogance. And, you know, I have to say, in this studio, I interviewed Professor Jonathan Jansen, one of our most brilliant educators, most famous, and I was really shocked when he told me he'd never been asked by government to sit down and give his opinion on the way forward. He has a doctorate in African education. His doctorate was on Zimbabwean education. There seems to be arrogance. The ANC leadership don't seem to want to listen to our experts, to people who've devoted their life to understanding the plight of the poor in South Africa.
It's not only that. I have a cleaning lady comes to me once a week. I live alone. She does for me 1 day a week, that's all. And she lives in Nyanga, and she tells me, President Zuma went to Bellville, but he didn't come anywhere near Khayelitsha. We lost the vote of the African people in Khayelitsha. You can't ignore people. And the conditions in Khayelitsha are not good. This is an ordinary person. You know, politicians say one letter to the editor is worth 5,000 opinions or 10,000. I don't know what it is now with the social media. But here's a person who lives in a community, was born there, and tells me, my people didn't go to vote. Now, that's arrogance. That's arrogance. How can we in the Western Cape, the party allegedly of non-racism, be so divided racially, with a political leader who, according to the media, arranged to pay the Klopser to come and perform at the ANC Gala 103rd at the Greenpoint, and then didn't pay them. He didn't have any money. He said, well, they didn't bring out the vote. I mean, you know, what sort of politics is it where you go to them, or to gangsters, there was that story as well, to do the politics for you, and undenied that they weren't paid.
Dennis, we have to take a break. Unfortunately, we'll be right back. And we're back with Dennis Goldberg. We've talked about the Cape, but I want to include the national leadership, because it seems that Jacob Zuma, it's not just capture by his cronies, but it's also capture by him. Nobody seems to be able to influence the president based on hard data or evidence or good governance.
Well, politics isn't about one person. Politics is about the ANC, its leadership, cadre at every level, national, provincial, local government. Let me take one example. A small village in the northwest. People wanted a road to link them to the highway. They kept their kids out of school for 8 months because they wanted a road. The kids of 76 died for education, and these parents punish their kids for generations to come. It goes on, this kind of deprivation, as we know. In Rivonia, not only pre-election did they burn 24 schools, they burnt one last night. schools where we're so desperate for education, hundreds of millions or hundreds of thousands of rands and books and the records of the kids, and the kids, where do they go to school? More important, where was the political leadership for a whole year before the burning started? What were they doing? Too busy with their personal affairs? That's a question that I ask. They didn't go there to say, Africa, fellow citizens, what are you doing about this? Can't you see the advantage? We're back to language grouping, tribal grouping. Go back to Pixley Seme, the founding of the ANC, to overcome tribalism.
Right.
And this is how we defeated apartheid, by being an African National Congress, not individual. And now we're going backwards. And we appeal by language to groups. 100% Zulu boy. Oh, those Xhosas of the Eastern Cape. Oh, these people from Venda, they don't understand us. What nonsense is this in our country led by the ANC? It's this aspect that we have given the Department of Arts and Culture as government, the duty to manage the social cohesion project. And the government itself practiced social discohesion and division. And I'm afraid to say that the opposition, not the EFF promotes division, but Maimane of the DA has captured. This is state capture. This is the capture of the policies of the ANC, promoting non-racialism. While the ANC, to win an election, promotes racism and separation. This is to hand a platter to the opposition. Nevertheless, I insist, we've done miracles in only 22 years. Only we needed to do a lot more, and we can't do it if we keep losing elections.
But Dennis, what is to be done? Leaders like yourself, older people, perhaps even include me, we've got to have the courage to point a way forward. What's the way forward?
Well, all I can tell you is when I've written letters in the past to the Secretary General, they've not even been acknowledged. When I write an open letter to the media, Sunday Times, Cape Times, a big splash, we don't read the media, we won't discuss our policies in public, so when will you discuss them? They said, let people come to us and present arguments, and I know of at least one group, personally, who went and told, no, leave it, we'll deal with it. What did they do? They lifted the carpet, swept the dust under it, and put it back again until after the elections. And now they're saying Zuma's great. Are we going to go on with another election to 2019 with the same leadership? And it's not just Zuma, it's the leadership as a whole. I personally, and many others of my generation, have said we need to clean the house from top to bottom. People don't trust us. How can President Zuma and his current leadership come to an election and say, vote for us, we will deliver, when we haven't delivered? And in part, we haven't delivered because of corruption, because we favor corrupt contractors who walk off the job and take a fat payment, where we have appointed favorites to the national enterprises, the state enterprises, Eskom, SAA, and people walk off with fat dismissal packages, leaving the companies in worse mess than they were starting with. And we go on doing it. We have a police intelligence officer who's been on trial, not on trial, and so on. What's going on here? When do we respect our own laws and demand of our deployees that they respect the law and the principles on which we stood? Not get rich quick.
But do you think the ANC has the capacity structurally to save itself?
Well, wherever I go, I meet ANC members who sort of whisper how pleased they are that I speak out, but they won't speak out themselves, and then say, but the ANC has always had the capacity to self-correct. And it's always bigger than just one person or a few people, and that's been our history. But the cost in the meantime, and I'm optimistic because I've spent my life with many others. I'm not unique. Many others, white, black, colored, Indian, people who've died. We survived prison. 137 people were hanged, over 1,000 were murdered extrajudicially. Between 10 and 12,000 murdered during the time of the negotiations, 90 to 94. Right. And now we say, oh, that was for us. I wasn't involved to stay poor. But poor in relation to who? Why is university education so expensive? Because it was for the white elite, highly paid, high income. Well, the mass of our people aren't that elite. How are we going to close that gap? How is it that in 22 years we have not enforced, through government, through limiting what presidents and judges and others get as salaries and allowances, close the gap between low-paid, entry-level workers, high-paid, skilled workers, and politicians and civil servants? We haven't closed the gap, it's got wider.
We have to break. We will be right back. And we're back with Dennis Goldberg, a Rivonia trialist. Dennis, what you've described, it reinforces the notion that the ANC leadership have been arrogant. They don't listen to Professor Janssen, one of our leading educationists, not even in a serious way, even if they dismiss him at the end. They don't respond to your emails.
And many, many others.
This is the ultimate arrogance.
Imagine an old veteran going to see the Secretary General, telling me he wants to see me to tell me what happened. And I said, well, tell me. He says, no, I won't do it on the telephone. Are we back in apartheid times where conspiracy, the Secret Service is watching us comrades talk to each other?
Is this because he didn't want to be overheard?
Yes.
Oh my, that's the Secretary General.
No. Somebody who'd seen the Secretary General.
Oh, I see, I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah.
So there is now a feeling that our phones are bugged.
Yes.
Illegally.
Yes.
I know you don't want to talk about, you see the problem as collective leadership, and it is. But do you think there are leaders who, in the senior ranks, that could take over and clean it up? I mean, do you think Cyril Ramaphosa, among others?
I'm not going to mention names.
Okay.
I think that's a fatal thing to do for their political careers.
Okay.
No, I'm being serious. That remark is why I said it.
Yes.
But I believe there are people who are very capable of cleaning the stable. It's a long job, and it's not going to happen overnight. Corruption, once it's embedded, takes a long time to overcome. And I have to say, it's been embedded in our society since the English settlers took over and did very well out of the exploitation of our people, the land, its resources of every kind. In 1948, a new group of whites, Afrikaners, joined them in racism by law. Well, in 1994, a new group joined government and did exactly the same thing, except we haven't learned how to cover up what we're doing in misappropriating funds.
In a more democratic environment where there's free expression.
And yes, isn't it great that our media, the messenger, gets blamed? Schlaudy from SABC says, we're not going to let people tell the truth, because if we don't hear the truth, then everything will be fine. That's King Canute stopping the waves washing onto the shore. This is an historical failure of government not to say, it took too long to put him down. But he hasn't been put down. The journalists have been fired, or a journalist. So this is a dangerous thing. Fortunately, our media have been robust. Our Chapter 9 institutions have been very robust against a group of politicians who have consistently, and officials, who've consistently sought to undermine our democracy. Our people have had enough. Therefore, this leadership, not an individual, the leadership needs to put itself to the test. Not manipulate, openly, no slates. Let's have an election of genuine leaders from underneath up to rise up, because we need the renewal. I know I'm an idealist, and there are good people. There's some people who are less bad. They haven't had time to build their crony networks. It'll start again, because that's the nature of world capitalist system. You use your politics to get business, and business to get politics. Mr. Trump is the example, the classic, and Mrs. Clinton.
Dennis, given the extent of your criticism, did you vote for the ANC?
Yes. It's a secret vote, but I did, because in the end, it is only the ANC that has rural and urban support on a massive scale throughout the country. And for the time being, it's the only potential bulwark against further racist division. But we'll see in the next couple of years, in the lead up to 2019, the national government and provincial election, whether the ANC can recover its principles of non-racism, of genuine concern, not just at election time, for all groups of our people, rural, urban, coloured, Indian, and white, and of course for African people as the dominant majority, most oppressed. But we have to consciously find ways of balancing out and not excluding people. And that requires a leadership that is deeply concerned about the way we've gone and the loss of support. How can Nelson Mandela Bay, the home of the ANC, Mandela,
cradle of the
Tambo,
liberation movement,
Mandela, Tambo, Mbeki, the other Mbeki, the Kayinga, so
but
many
also
comrades.
Steve Biko, Sobukwe.
All of them out of that area, and we lose the election. We must have done something terribly wrong. And we parachuted in a good guy, Danny Jordan, who came up with good policies, but couldn't win that floating coloured vote, which lost us the election, because we alienated them.
We really are out of time, but I do want to ask you, is there a significant body of people around that in the ANC that support what you're saying and
I
that
believe
talk to
so.
you?
I believe so. What concerns me, of course, is that President Zuma ran the ANC internal intelligence outfit, and I'm sure he's got the dirt on everybody who's around him and will use it to protect himself, because he's a clever fox of a man, a yakalas, as they say in politics, and other people as well. And they don't want to go because there's a threat of imprisonment. I believe Zuma has to have an amnesty, like Ford did for President Nixon and so on, because we have to move on.
Yes.
It's not about revenge, it's about how do we move on. But it's the people around the president who don't have that protection who will try to hold on. I thank you for the interview.
I thank you, and thank you for all you've done for South Africa, Dennis. That's all we have time for. Unfortunately, I wish we had more.
Publisher.
I'm going to recommend, besides Dennis's book, which I would strongly urge you to read A Life for Freedom, The Mission to End Racism in South Africa, published by
Kentucky University Press.
Kentucky University. I also want to recommend a book by Thomas Piketty. For those of you who couldn't get through the big volume he wrote looking at inequality under capitalism, there's a new book out in the bookshops called Chronicles on Our Troubled Times by Thomas Piketty. It's much shorter, it's an easier read. It's his columns, for the first time translated into English from the French. And it's the sort of book you can dip in and out of. I'll just mention two quick things. One of his columns is about inequality, and it's interesting to look at the facts. Inequality in the West, in America, for example, actually narrowed from the 30s to the 70s. And during that time, tax rates on the very wealthy went up to 60, 70, 80%, even 90% in some cases. And after that, perhaps it went too far, there was a backlash and it came all the way down. And ever since the 80s, the inequality has risen to a point that's affecting the politics internationally. The last column I'll mention is one on South Africa, and I don't have time to go into it except to say that he does talk about the fact that Africa doesn't need aid. All we need to do much better than what we get in aid is to stop the international, to prevent the permanent pillaging of African wealth through the tax havens and other tricks that financial institutions are capable of getting up to. Well, that's our show. Thanks for watching. Look forward to see you next week, and happy reading.